Hello everyone, welcome back to the part 2 of the How to Reaccess Your Chess 4th edition. And today's our topic is the minor pieces. We are going to talk about the bishop and the knight, how to use the bishop and the knight to the 100% capacity, to the 100% power. Mainly we are going to talk about the knight because it is the most psychopath piece on the chessboard. And yeah, it's many players in the chess community face a lot of trouble in to play against the knights or to play with the knights. So today we are going to solve that problem by looking at this video, and this video is going to be extremely critical for your minor pieces like middle game and end game and stuff like that. It's going to be very critical. So till then, keep watching. So today we are going to again talk about 10 various diagrams in which we are going to talk both about the bishop and the knight. So in the first diagram we have this position and we are white. So our opponent is having the knight and we are having the bishop. So like this is a particular game where it's completely winning for white because first of all it's black to play, but it's completely winning. White is having 3 pawns. But if I say that this game was won by black, I think neither of you would ever believe that black is the one who won the game. Though yeah, the pawn is just 2 pawns, 2 squares ahead, 2 squares behind on being a queen. But the bishop is simply covering the e2 square, and it can't be really possible. But black really won this game. I'll show you how. The game is not of like the GMs or something, but yeah. Black played the move knight to f2, hitting the bishop and the pawn, and white played the move bishop e2, defending the pawn. Black captured the pawn. You can't really capture the knight because of the king takes. Black is the one being queen early and with a check, so black can win the game. So you really can't capture the knight, so you have to push the pawn. And like at the first glance, it doesn't look like the knight would be able to catch up the pawn. But actually it can. The knight can really stop this pawn. Knight e5 was played in the game, and here we have a7 simply trying to make a queen. But here comes the move, knight to c6 check. And knight suddenly a check and the pawn is hanging. So white blended a pawn, but still it's an equal position. So white came to attack the knight. Check. Here. So white side is pretty clear. He wants to make queen. So here white pushes the pawn because the knight is away. But here comes again a check. And again it's a check and the pawn is hanging. So white blenders again another pawn. But still it's equal. It's a draw. But now white has to play very careful. King c5, knight to c2. King c4, king d6, king d3, king g3. Black idea is to bring the king and try to push the pawn. King to c3. King to f2. You can't capture because of takes. Black can move the king and make a queen. So here we have bishop to c4, knight to e1, king to d4, knight check, and suddenly king to e4, a blender. And here comes the move, knight to d2 check. The bishop is hanging, and here black simply pushed the pawn, and he went on to win the game. So you can see how the knight is considered as the psychopath of the chessboard. It is a very tricky piece. It is a very difficult piece to analyze. You need to calculate various possibilities if you are playing against the knight, or even if you are playing with the knight. So yeah, you can see how black simply won the game. So yeah, knight is a very tricky piece. So this was our first diagram, knight's psychopath of the chessboard. Now let's move on to the second diagram. But as we know, both the players are super grandmaster and anything can happen. So it's white to play, and Vishwanathan and Anand is white, and it's white to play, and he's completely winning the game after h7. It's a check. It's a completely winning position for Anand. h7 check, the king move. For example, if king h8, here we have rook f1, simply hitting the knight. Pawn takes, rook takes, and it's losing. Like f7 is collapsing. So even if you try to play king g7, rook takes, and suddenly you have to capture, and now it's completely winning for white. Black is an exchange down. Black can simply gather every pawn, and he went on to win the game. And okay, after h7, if king to g7, Here comes the mind-blowing move in the position. You can try to find the move. You can pause the video. So yeah, here is the move, knight to e6 check, a very powerful move. The point is pretty simple. After f takes, knight takes check. The king and the rook is attacked. If you try to capture the knight, white can make a queen and it's a game over. And you have to move the king, and after knight takes, you can see it's a completely winning position for white. White is a exchange a pawn, very strong pawn on h7, and it's game over. So yeah, this would have been the best, but Anand played the move knight to f3, and it looked like the gods of the knights was not kind to the Vishy. So this was simply a blunder, because here comes a very powerful move, knight to h5. And suddenly the rook looks like a bad piece, doing nothing, just staring at the knight, which is already protected by the g6 pawn. Rook to g1, the idea is to move the knight and capture the h5 knight. So lastly, we simply move the king. Knight to h3, bishop to c8, hitting the knight, knight to f2, and here we have knight to f4. Knight into e5, Anand trying to be smart. The idea is pretty simple. If black captures, you can capture the knight, and white basically won a pawn, and white is still having a better position. But Ivanchuk here played knight to e2, hitting the rook, rook e1, and now knight to d4. And here the knight is attacked, so Anand simply moved the knight. And I guess many of you would have already found the move, knight to f3. And suddenly it looked like both the rooks are attacked and both the rooks are forked. So you can see how it was the last round of the World Blitz Moscow 2007, and Anand simply forked both the rooks, and suddenly he's completely losing. There is no way he can protect either of the rook, and one rook is at least going to fall. So yeah, knight f6, attacking the rook moves, knight to b5, hitting the rook. Here Ivanchuk simply move the rook, and now the rook is going to fall on the next move. So Anand decided to resign the game. But you can see how knight is such a tricky piece that, from a completely losing position, Ivanchuk went on to win a rook and even the game. And even the former world champion, Anand, was not able to spot this particular move despite being the world champion in the past. So you can already sense that knight is a very tricky piece. And yeah, knight is the psychopath of the chessboard. So yeah, this was the second diagram. So let's move to the third diagram. Okay, coming to the third diagram, we have the knight as ultimate blockader. So what do I mean by this here is, white is having 5 pawns in this position, black is also having 5 pawns, and it looks like f pawn is a passed pawn, c pawn is a passed pawn, and the knight and the bishop both are acting as a defender blockader to stop the passed pawn. But here the basic difference between the knight and the bishop in this particular position here is, the bishop is the piece who is solely only defending, not giving some counterattacks. Whereas the knight on f4 is also defending the pawn, and as well as putting pressure on the e6 and the g6 pawn. So it's white to play despite both the pieces are equal in material wise, and both the pieces are still blocking the pawn. The position is completely winning for white because of the king before, bishop to e8. Because if you try to bring the king, you can't bring the king because suddenly the g6 is hanging. So you have to bring the bishop back, and you can now bring the king. But after king a5, king to e7, king b6, king to d7, and after king b7, suddenly the game is over, covering all the 3 squares, and now it's a straight path for the pawn to being promoted to a queen on c8, and it's completely winning. So you can see that how material-wise the position is equal, but knight in the close position is more of a king, because yeah, with as well as a perfect blockader of a pawn, he can counterattack. This is the special ability that only the psychopath of the chessboard, the knight, is having. So yeah, this was the third diagram, knight as an ultimate blockader as well as a attacker. So you can now, let's move to the fourth diagram. So yeah, here we have the fourth diagram. The bishop is the king of distance. What do I mean by this is, like, I know like many of the people watching the video must be thinking king of the king. But okay, we are not talking about the king, but the bishop is the king of distance. Means the bishop is the piece who can travel long distances in an instant. Whereas compared to the knight, like if I need to ask how many moves it is going to take to capture the a6 pawn from the knight and for the bishop, you would say like bishop is going to take only one move to put the bishop on b7 and simply capture the a6 pawn. Whereas the knight is going to take a lot of moves by coming to g4, by coming to e3, by coming to perhaps to d5, followed by c7 and capturing the here pawn. So like 1, 2, 3, 4, like 5. It is going to take minimum 5 moves to capture the a6 pawn, whereas the bishop requires only 1 move to capture the pawn. 2 moves exactly, but yeah. So you can see how the bishop, the ability of bishop is to travel long distances in an instant compared to the knight who can travel shorter distances. It takes time to travel long distances because of his fewer because it takes time. The knight is a piece which takes time to travel long distance. So yeah. So the bishop is the king of the distance. This was the fourth diagram, and now let's move to the fifth diagram. Okay, so here we have the diagram number 5. Knights are master of close position. Knight can attack both light and dark squares. So what do I mean by this particular statement here is, so it's white to play, it's black to play, and material-wise the position is equal, but it's completely winning for white. The reason is quite simple. As I told in my previous as we discussed in the previous diagram, that the knight can travel only short distances, but it can cover anything, any square. The knight can cover all the 64 squares on a chessboard, as well as dark, as well as white. So here it's black to play, and the point here is the bishop is on the right square, the pawn is on dark squares. So there is no way the bishop can defend the pawn. And on the next move, white is going to simply put the knight on d3 and capture the c5 pawn, and going to soon win the game because white is going to be a pawn up. So there is no way for black to continue. After a5, knight d3, a4 takes. You can even capture, you can even push the pawn. Every move is winning up. And you can see how the knights are the master of close position. Whenever there is a close position in your game, try to prefer knights on the board. Like in the majority of the cases, I personally prefer knights because it is a very tricky piece, which can be very helpful in your game. And yeah, knights can attack both light and dark squares. And this is the one limitation of the bishop, that if the bishop is on the light square, it can only move to the light square. And if the bishop is on dark square, the bishop can only move to the dark square. So it is one of the most huge limitation I got to see about the bishop. That is one of the major reason I prefer knight over the bishop. So this was the diagram number 5. So it's time for us to move to the next 6th diagram. Okay, so here we have the diagram number 6. Knights on the first and the third rank. So yeah, so what do I mean by this statement here is, it is pretty clear statement. You can see the one knight is on the first rank and the second knight is on the third rank. This is considered as ranks. So you can see how the bishop and the queen is attacking the h2 pawn, and the knight on f1 looks like an extremely bad piece on f1. But you can see how beautifully the knight is simply covering the h2 square, and there is no way the bishop and the queen can attack the h2 pawn while the knight is on f1. So the knight on f1 is a piece which is solely focused on the defensive path, and there is no way the first rank knight can ever attack. So you will see it is completely defending the pawn. It can go to g3, but it is still defending everything. So yeah, the knights on the first rank is basically completely defensive piece. Whereas if I talk about the knight on c3, here the knight on c3 is covering hitting the d5 pawn, putting some real good pressure on the d5 pawn, as well as white is also promoting to play the move e4, as the knight is also covering the e4 square. So in this particular position, a move like e4 can be very beneficial because the knight is on c3. So if whenever if pawn captures the pawn, you can simply capture with the knight, and you can see the moment the knight reaches to fourth rank, it becomes an attacking piece as well as a defending piece. It is defending the f2 pawn. It can perhaps come to g3 as a defensive piece, but it is also attacking the bishop on d6, like covering the sixth rank, some critical sixth rank, the opponent's territory. So yeah, the knight on c3 is both act as a defender as well as a counter attacker. So yeah, the property of the knight on the third rank is to attack as well as defend, whereas the knight on first rank can solely base on the defensive mode, which is not bad at all. You can put your piece at defensive if there is a extremely high pressure, if your opponent is on the attacking side, and the knight on the first rank can be extremely helpful to defend. So this was our sixth diagram. So it's time for us to move to the seventh diagram. So yeah, here we have the seventh diagram, knight on the fourth rank, and you can see how the board looks extremely beautiful. The knight on the fourth, the d4 square is covering every blue square over the area, and you can see the d4 knight is the most ideal square for the knight. There is no way black can ever remove the knight from the d4 square, and you can see the knight act as both defender as well as attacker. It covers the sixth rank, which is the most critical squares for the black. Like the rook can't come to c6 ever in his life because the knight is covering it. The knight can also jump back in the future if it needs. Like white can simply move the knight back and simply hit the isolated d5 pawn. So it can be an idea. So basically, the knight on the fourth rank act as both the defender and the attacker, but it is a much more advanced version compared to the knight on the third rank. So yeah, this was the seventh diagram, the knight on the fourth rank. So now let's move to the eighth diagram. Okay, so talking about the diagram number 8, knight on the fifth rank. So once the knight reaches on the fifth rank, it is the most aggressive piece in the game. It is the most powerful piece. It is the most attacking piece. The properties of the fifth rank knight is to solely attack, because yeah, you can see it is extremely dangerous and poisonous, because it's like the knight hits the c6 pawn, covers extremely 7th rank squares, the 6th rank squares, and like black is extremely uncomfortable. There is no way for black to play very comfortably, because like black can't even have many squares in his own territory, whereas black is also looking for a square to put his knight on d5. But the moment the knight reaches on d5, we can simply play the move c4, hit the knight. So basically, the idea here is to not allow your opponent to create an outpost for the knight, whereas put your knight at an outpost and try to hit your enemy's territory. And yeah, you can say it's a very dangerous piece. You can even play a move like queen c4, hitting the c6 and the e6 pawn. So it can be very helpful if the knight reaches on e5. So it was the 8th diagram. Now let's move to the 9th diagram. So yeah, here we have the 9th diagram, knight on the 6th rank. And okay, it looks a bit chaos. So let me explain everything. So here the knight is on d6, which looks like a god of a piece. Like the c5 pawn, the e5 pawn is defending the knight. There is no way black can ever remove the knight. Compared to the dull bishop acting as solely as a pawn, doing nothing but a dead piece. We can already claim this position as 1-0 because there is no way black can ever make a play in this particular position. It is a kind of a dream position for white. And yeah, the idea, like, white is having the time of all the world. White can take as much time as he wants to find even a single plan, and it is a game over for black. Like, there are many plans. White can simply play the move knight to e4 to f6, try to hit the bishop and the king. It is a kind of a slow plan to put the knight to f6, try to put the queen over here, and try to checkmate the black king. So, and another plan could be to put the rook to a3, a1, queen to a2, and try to capture on the b file and take control of the a file. It is again a plan which can be very critical in such positions where the white is the only one creating some play here, because white is the one on the driver's seat solely because of the knight on d6. So like there are many times where you do not like to take so many time with your just moving the knight. But guys, the knight is a slow piece. It is going to take your time, but once it reaches its idle square, it is going to create many threats for your opponent, and soon it will going to help you to win the game. And this is the point of this is a real point of improving your positional play, strategical play. If you want to play some good strategical positional play, you need to have these capabilities of playing slow pieces, put the pieces at the best way. So this was our ninth diagram. Now it's time for us to move to the final diagram of the day, of the video, the 10th diagram. So let's move. Okay, so here we have the 10th diagram, the final diagram of the day. And this is a game between Nepomniachtchi versus Brynell. Very strong, both players are extremely strong grandmaster, and the game is from the Wijk 2007. And White is having a better position in this particular position. So yeah, you can see how White is the one attacking and Black is the one defending. So here Nepo get a bit too much excited and he went for the move bishop to c1. And his idea is to push the pawn and try to checkmate Black king on h6. But it was a bad idea as Black played the move rook h8. The idea is to play the king h7 on the next move and defend the h6. So rook to g4, and here we have knight g7. And suddenly everything looks protected because knight on f5 can be a very good square for the knight. After king g8, the position is extremely defendable and I don't see any problem for Black in the position. Whereas, if I would have given this position to you guys, and if I would have asked you guys, what is the most ideal square for the knight to go on from the e2, what would be your answer? Tell me in the comment box below to make sure. And if I tell you the answer, the most ideal square for the knight would be on e4. The answer is pretty simple because once the knight reaches on e4 via c3, it is having the capability to play a move like knight to f6, very dangerous move. Even a move like knight g5, giving a check because the pawn cannot capture the knight because the king is pinned. So the most ideal square for the knight would be on e4 because it would be having the knight is on the fourth rank. It is having the capability to defend as well as attack. So yeah, that would be the most ideal square. And if Nepo would have continued with knight to c3, after bishop b7 trying to cover the e4 square, we can still put the knight on e4. And even if Black captures the knight, after pawn checks, here we have again another idea. Our idea is to play f5. Because the pawn is on e4, we are having the idea of f5, and f5 is nearly impossible to stop. So Black can play a move, but still f5 is an extremely strong move. And you can see how the bishops are acting like a monster despite being spawned on e4 and e5. There's nothing Black can do in the position. White can even capture on e6 or g6 and can open his rook file, and it's going to be completely game over for Black, and it's a dead position for Black. So this was the point. So basically, chess is a team game. If possible, make sure every piece joins in the battle. And you can see how if Nepo would have played like this to put the piece at his most ideal square after knight c3, here takes, and after f5. And after f5, the point here is White can now think of a move like bishop c1 and attack the h6 pawn, because now the rook h8 is not yet played because the rook is on g8. So now bishop c1 looks a very sensible move to me, and it's completely not completely, but White is very comfortable and White is better in the position. So if Nepo would have continued like this, he would have won the game. I don't know what happened in the game, but yeah. So this was our 10th diagram. So yeah, this was all for today. If this video have helped you to improve your strategical positional thinking, how to move the knight, the psychopaths of the chessboard, then make sure to like the video and make sure to subscribe to our channel if you are new to our channel. And make sure to share these videos with your friends and family members. And I'm going to soon. And on the next video, I'm going to, perhaps on the tomorrow video, I'm going to come up with the remaining 8 diagrams in this particular topic. The 8 games are very crucial. And I'm going to discuss that particular 8 different diagrams with you. So till then, stay tuned and keep watching One Shot Chess. Now get out of here.